After I became a millionaire, I discovered that some secrets don't stay buried. They wait in the softest leather, between silk linings, in places you've touched 1,000 times without really seeing. My name is Caroline Ashford. I'm the founder and CEO of Ashford & Lane, a luxury interior design firm with offices in Manhattan and the Hamptons. I built this company from a single rented desk in Brooklyn to a business worth $32 million. But the number in my account never felt like the true wealth. The true wealth was supposed to be the freedom, from doubt, from the past, from everything I'd left behind to become this version of myself. It was a Tuesday morning in late October when everything I thought I knew began to unravel. I was standing in my walk-in closet, all cream marble and brushed brass, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park West, pulling handbags from their dust covers for a charity auction my publicist had organized. Designer pieces I'd collected over the years, beautiful things I no longer used, each one a monument to a different victory, a different deal closed, a different version of Caroline Ashford I'd tried on and outgrown. The Hermes, the Chanel, the vintage Dior my mother would have loved. My mother. I paused with that thought, the way you pause when you hear a sound in an empty house. Before we continue, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Like this video so this story reaches more hearts, and subscribe for the next journeys. The bag I pulled next was burgundy leather, Italian, butter soft. I'd bought it 7 years ago in Boston, the week I signed my first $1 million contract. I remembered the store, the light through tall windows, the sales associate who'd wrapped it like a gift. I remembered feeling like I'd finally arrived. I unzipped the interior pocket, something I rarely did. These bags were ornamental by then, and my fingers brushed paper. A folded note. My heart did something strange, something animal and afraid. I pulled it out slowly. The paper was thick, expensive stationery, cream-colored with a subtle deckled edge. The kind of paper someone uses when they want their words to carry weight. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant, slanted, written in blue ink that had faded slightly at the edges. Caroline, if you're reading this, then enough time has passed. There are things you need to know about the life you've built, about who helped you build it, and why. The note wasn't signed. I stood there, the closet suddenly too bright, too white, the bag dangling from my other hand like evidence. My reflection watched me from 3 angles in the mirrors. A woman in a silk blouse and tailored trousers, 41 years old, successful, controlled, certain. Except I wasn't certain of anything anymore, because I didn't remember anyone putting this note in my bag. I didn't recognize the handwriting. And the date I'd bought this bag, that specific week, that specific triumph, was also the week everything in my life had changed. The week I'd met Marcus. The week the loan came through that shouldn't have. The week my biggest competitor suddenly withdrew their bid on the project that made my career. The week I'd stopped asking questions because the answers might have cost me everything. I read the note again. Things you need to know. My hands were shaking. I didn't know who had written this, or when, or how it had gotten into a bag I'd carried almost daily for 2 years before retiring it to this closet. But standing there, with October light turning the marble gold and the city sprawling below me like proof of my success, I felt something crack open inside my chest. A door I'd locked 7 years ago. A question I'd refused to ask. Who helped you build it? And why? The bag slipped from my fingers onto the thick carpet, and I sank down beside it, the note still in my hand, my perfectly constructed world suddenly feeling like a stage set. Beautiful, expensive, and built on ground I'd never actually tested. I didn't go to the office that day. I called Simone, my assistant, and told her I was working from home. A decision-making day, I said, which wasn't entirely a lie. I sat at my dining table, the one I'd commissioned from a Danish craftsman, all pale wood and clean lines. and spread out everything I could remember from that week 7 years ago. Contracts, emails, calendar entries I'd saved in my digital archive because I documented everything. Always had. A habit born from years of having to prove I belonged in rooms that didn't want me there. October 2018. Boston. I'd been 34, running a small design firm out of a renovated warehouse in Brooklyn, taking on projects that paid barely enough to cover rent and payroll for my 2 employees. Good work, respected work, but small. I was talented, and I knew it. But talent without capital is just potential, and potential doesn't pay mortgages or expand businesses or silence the voice in your head that sounds like your father saying you'd never make it on your own. Then came the Meridian Tower project, a luxury residential high-rise in Boston's Seaport District, $60 million, the kind of contract that could transform a boutique firm into a major player. I'd submitted a proposal along with 15 other firms, including Hartwell Design, the industry giant, the firm everyone expected to win. I was the long shot, the underdog, the woman with the beautiful portfolio and insufficient backing. But I wanted it with a ferocity that surprised even me. I scrolled through my emails from that October, the screen glowing in the afternoon light filtering through my windows. There, the notification that I'd been shortlisted. Then the request for a second presentation. Then the dinner meeting with the developer, a man named Richard Chen, at a restaurant overlooking the harbor. I remembered that dinner. The way Richard had looked at my projections, my material samples, my renderings. The way he'd nodded slowly, like he was seeing something beyond what I'd presented. "You remind me of someone," he'd said. I'd smiled, deflected. "Hopefully someone you liked." "Someone I owed," he'd said. And the words had hung there between us, strange and weighted, before he'd moved on to discussing timelines. I'd thought it was just a figure of speech. Now, staring at my notes from that meeting, I wondered what I'd missed, what I'd been too hungry, too desperate to see. Because 3 days after that dinner, Richard had called me personally, not through his assistant, not through official channels, but on my cell phone at 8 a.m. "The project is yours," he'd said. "Pending some financing details on your end, which I think we can help facilitate." Help facilitate? A contact of mine, a private lender, very favorable terms. I'd been too stunned to question it, too grateful. The loan had come through within a week, $1.5 million at an interest rate that seemed almost generous. The contract was signed by the end of the month. Hartwell Design had withdrawn their bid the day before, citing strategic realignment. Everything had fallen into place like choreography, like someone had arranged it. I stood up from the table and walked to my window, pressing my palm against the glass. 73rd floor. The city looked like a model of itself from up here, manageable, contained. But I felt untethered, like I was floating above my own life, seeing it from an angle that changed everything. The note was still in my pocket. I pulled it out, unfolded it again. "There are things you need to know about the life you've built." My phone buzzed. Marcus, my boyfriend of 6 years, the man I'd met that same week in October, at a gallery opening I'd almost skipped because I was drowning in preparation for the Meridian presentation. The text was simple. "Dinner tonight? Haven't seen you in 3 days. Miss you. Marcus." Kind, steady Marcus, who worked in private equity, who'd been patient with my long hours and last-minute cancellations, who fit into my life like he'd been designed for it, who I'd never quite let all the way in. I typed back, "Yes, my place, 8 p.m. Because suddenly I needed to look at him and know, really know, if he was part of this too. If anything in my carefully constructed world was exactly what it seemed. The afternoon light was fading, turning everything in my apartment amber and uncertain. And I stood there holding a note from a stranger, wondering how many other secrets were hidden in the beautiful things I'd accumulated. How many other truths were waiting to be found. I spent the hours before Marcus arrived doing something I hadn't done in years, I went through my other bags. All of them. 23 designer handbags, each one unzipped, unlined, searched with the methodical precision I usually reserved for client presentations. I checked every pocket, every hidden compartment, running my fingers along seams and beneath silk linings like I was searching for contraband in my own life. Nothing. Just the one note. Just the one bag from that specific week. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt more unsettled, because it meant the note was intentional, targeted. Someone had known exactly which bag to choose, exactly when I'd bought it, exactly what it represented. By 7:30, I'd opened a bottle of Sancerre and was standing in my kitchen, pretending to prepare dinner, but mostly just moving vegetables around a cutting board without actually cutting anything. My hands felt clumsy, my thoughts kept fragmenting. I'd built my entire adult life on control, on knowing exactly where I stood, what I'd earned, what belonged to me by right of my own work. I'd left Connecticut at 22, with an architecture degree and $300, determined to prove that Caroline Ashford, daughter of Thomas Ashford, the man who'd told me I was too soft for business, too romantic for the real world, could build something that mattered. And I had. Hadn't I? Ashford and Lane employed 47 people now. We designed interiors for hotels, penthouses, private galleries across the Northeast. My work had been featured in Architectural Digest, Elle Decor, The Times. I'd done this. Me. Except now there was a note suggesting otherwise. Who helped you build it? And why? The intercom buzzed. Marcus. I pressed the button to let him up, caught my reflection in the darkened window. I looked composed. Cream cashmere sweater, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a way that suggested effortless elegance even though I'd redone it twice. But my eyes gave me away. They always did. Too searching, too afraid. I'd learned to hide that fear in boardrooms, in client meetings, in negotiations where showing vulnerability meant losing leverage. But I'd never quite learned to hide it from myself. The elevator opened directly into my apartment, one of the luxuries I'd allowed myself when I bought this place. And Marcus stepped out carrying flowers, white peonies, my favorite. He was wearing the navy sweater I'd given him last Christmas, his hair slightly disheveled from the wind, his smile immediate and warm. "There she is," he said, crossing to kiss me. "I was starting to think you'd been abducted by a particularly demanding client." I kissed him back, tasting wine on my own lips, feeling the solidness of him, the reliability. Marcus was handsome in an understated way, 45, graying at the temples, the kind of man who looked like he belonged in corner offices and country clubs, which he did. His family had money, old money, the kind that whispered instead of shouted. We'd met at that gallery opening 7 years ago. He'd been standing in front of an abstract piece, champagne in hand, and had turned to me with a half smile. "I think it's upside down," he'd said. I'd laughed, surprising myself. "I think that's the point." Then the artist is smarter than both of us. It had been easy after that. Natural. He'd asked for my number, called when he said he would, taken me to dinner at quiet restaurants where the lighting was kind and the conversations felt adult, uncomplicated. He'd been patient when I'd told him I needed to move slowly, that I had a business to build, that I couldn't promise anything beyond the present moment. He'd never pushed, never demanded, never asked questions I didn't want to answer. Standing in my kitchen now, watching him arrange the peonies in a vase with more care than most men would bother with, I felt something sharp beneath my ribs. Had that been love? Or had that been convenience? "You okay?" he asked, glancing up. "You seem far away." "Just tired," I said, which was true but insufficient. "Long week." He set the vase on the counter, came around to where I was standing. His hand settled on my waist, familiar, proprietary in a way that used to feel comforting. "You work too hard," he said softly. "You always have." "Someone has to," I said, and it came out sharper than I'd intended. He pulled back slightly, searching my face. "What's wrong?" "Everything," I wanted to say. I found a note that suggests my success might not be entirely mine, that someone orchestrated it, that maybe even you, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I knew more. "Nothing," I said. "Just thinking about a project." He accepted this, the way he always accepted my deflections, and moved to pour himself wine. We ate at the dining table, the conversation drifting through safe topics. His week, a merger his firm was handling, a mutual friend's engagement party next month. He was good at this, at filling silence with pleasant words, at making everything seem normal. But I kept watching him. The way he held his wine glass, the way he smiled when he talked, looking for cracks, for signs, for anything that suggested he knew more than he was saying. "Do you remember how we met?" I asked suddenly, interrupting something he was saying about quarterly projections. He blinked. "Of course, the gallery, the upside-down painting. Do you remember why you were there that night?" "A client had pieces in the show," he said slowly, his brow furrowing. "Why?" "Just wondering," I said, "if you'd planned to be there, or if it was chance." He set down his fork, and for the first time that evening, something shifted in his expression, something cautious. "Caroline, what's this about?" I could have told him then, could have shown him the note, asked him directly if he knew anything about Richard Chen, about the loan, about the way my life had suddenly aligned that October like planets in formation. But I didn't, because some part of me, the part that had learned not to trust easy gifts, that had spent years proving I deserved to be in rooms that doubted me, needed to find the truth myself before I shared it with anyone. Even him. "Nothing," I said again, reaching for my wine. "Just nostalgic, I guess." He studied me for another moment, then nodded, letting it go the way he always let things go. And I sat there across from him in my perfect apartment with my perfect dinner, feeling more alone than I had in years. Marcus left around midnight. He'd wanted to stay, had started to suggest it in that careful way he had, but I'd pleaded early meetings, exhaustion, the need for sleep. He'd kissed my forehead and told me to take care of myself, and I'd watched the elevator doors close on his concerned expression, feeling like I was severing something I couldn't name. I didn't sleep. Instead, I sat at my laptop in the dark living room, the city glittering below me like scattered diamonds, and did what I should have done 7 years ago. I researched Richard Chen first, the developer who'd given me the Meridian Tower project. His company, Chen Properties, was successful, reputable, with projects across the Northeast. Nothing suspicious. But when I dug deeper, searching through archived news articles and business filings, I found something that made my breath catch. Chen Properties had been sued in 2017, the year before I got the contract, by a former partner. The case had been settled quietly, sealed records, but the partner's name was listed in the initial filing. Thomas Ashford. My father. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. My father. The man I hadn't spoken to in nearly 15 years. Not since the day I'd told him I was moving to New York to start my own firm, and he'd called it a fantasy, a waste of my education, a guaranteed failure. "You don't have what it takes, Caroline," he'd said, standing in his study in our Connecticut house, surrounded by leather-bound books and the smell of expensive scotch. "You're too emotional, too idealistic. The real world will eat you alive." I'd left the next morning and never looked back. But now, seeing his name connected to Richard Chen, to the man who'd given me my breakthrough, I felt something cold slide down my spine. I clicked through more articles, more records. The lawsuit had been about a commercial development in Hartford that had gone bad. Cost overruns, mismanagement, accusations on both sides. It had been settled for an undisclosed amount 2 months before Richard Chen called me about the Meridian Tower. 2 months. My hands were shaking as I opened a new search window. The private lender who'd given me the loan, I dealt with them through email and one phone call, signed documents electronically, the whole process streamlined and professional. The lending company was called Ashmont Capital. Ashmont. Ash for Ashford. Mont for... I typed frantically. Ashmont Capital. Founding partners. Ownership structure. The information was sparse, deliberately opaque, but I found a business registration from 2016. 2 founding partners listed. One was a man named Gerald Ashford, my uncle, my father's older brother. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of my laptop, my breath coming too fast, too shallow. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. My father and his brother had arranged everything. The project, the loan. My entire breakthrough had been orchestrated by the man who'd told me I would fail, who I'd cut out of my life to prove him wrong. But why? Why would he do this after what he'd said? After the way we'd ended? Unless he'd never believed I would fail at all. Unless this had been something else entirely. I pulled out the note again, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped it. There are things you need to know about the life you've built, about who helped you build it, and why. The why was what destroyed me, because suddenly I could see it. My father, controlling even in his absence, arranging my success like he'd arranged everything else in my life. My education, my internships, even my rebellion maybe had been something he'd anticipated, planned for, managed from a distance. I wasn't self-made. I was his creation. The sob came out of nowhere, violent and raw. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to contain it, but it was too late. 7 years of pride, of certainty, of believing I'd earned everything through my own merit. It shattered like glass. I'd been so careful, so meticulous. I'd documented every decision, every contract, every success, building a fortress of proof that I deserved to be here. And underneath it all, invisible and inescapable, had been my father's money, my father's connections, my father's belief that I couldn't do it alone, that I needed him even when I was trying to escape him. My phone rang, the sound shocking in the silent apartment. I looked at the screen through tears. My mother. I hadn't spoken to her in months, our relationship reduced to occasional text messages and birthday cards. She'd stayed with my father after I left, choosing his version of the story over mine. And I'd let the distance grow until it felt permanent. I answered without thinking. Caroline? Her voice was thin, uncertain. Sweetheart, are you all right? How did you know? I asked, my voice wrecked. A long pause. Your father called me tonight. He said you might have questions, that it was time. Time for what? Another pause, longer this time, and I could hear her breathing, the familiar sound of her trying to find the right words to say something difficult. Time for you to know the truth, she said finally, about why he did what he did, about what happened that we never told you. My chest felt like it was collapsing. What are you talking about? Not over the phone, she said. Can you come home? Please? There are things your father wanted to tell you himself, but he couldn't. And now... Her voice broke. Now I think you need to hear them. Is he dying? I asked, the question bitter and sharp. No, she said. but he's been carrying something for 15 years that's been killing him slowly. And Caroline, she took a shaky breath. It's been killing me too. I closed my eyes, the tears hot on my cheeks, the note crumpled in my other hand. I'll come, I said. Tomorrow. After I hung up, I sat in the darkness for a long time, watching the city breathe below me. This glittering monument to a success that might have been a gift I was too proud to recognize. Or a cage I'd walked into willingly, thinking I'd picked the lock myself. I drove to Connecticut the next morning in rain that turned the highway gray and blurred. I'd canceled everything. Meetings, site visits, a lunch with a potential client that Simone had spent weeks arranging. I'd sent Marcus a text saying I needed a few days for family matters, deliberately vague, and ignored his immediate response asking if I was okay. I wasn't okay. I was driving toward answers I wasn't sure I wanted, through landscapes that used to mean home, but now just felt like scenes from someone else's life. The house looked smaller than I remembered. Red brick colonial, black shutters, the maple tree in the front yard now massive, its bare branches reaching toward the November sky like skeletal hands. My mother's car was in the driveway. My father's Mercedes was gone. She opened the door before I knocked, like she'd been watching for me. At 68, she was still elegant. Gray hair and a neat bob, simple clothes in shades of cream and navy. But her eyes were red-rimmed, tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. "Thank you for coming," she said, and pulled me into a hug that felt desperate. We sat in the living room I'd grown up in, on furniture that had been reupholstered but never replaced, drinking tea neither of us wanted. The silence stretched between us like years, like all the conversations we'd never had. "Where's Dad?" I asked finally. "At the office. He wanted to be here, but..." She set down her cup with shaking hands. "He couldn't face you. Not yet." "Why not?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before. Guilt, deep and corroding. "Because what we did," she said quietly, "what he arranged, it wasn't just about helping you succeed, Caroline. It was about protecting you. And he's afraid that when you understand why, you'll never forgive us." My heart was pounding. Protecting me from what? She stood up, walked to the window, her back to me. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the view of the garden she'd always tended so carefully. "Do you remember," she said slowly, "when you were 21, that summer before your senior year of college?" I frowned. Vaguely. I did an internship in Boston. At Hartwell Design, actually. "Yes." She turned to face me. "What do you remember about that summer?" I searched my memory, pulling up fragments. The internship had been competitive, prestigious. I'd worked long hours, learned from senior designers, felt like I was finally finding my path. But the details were hazy, softened by time and distance. "Not much," I admitted. "It was good, important for my career. Why?" My mother's face crumpled slightly. "You don't remember because we made sure you wouldn't. The doctor said it was the trauma, that your mind had blocked it out as a protection mechanism. And we..." Her voice broke. "We let it stay blocked. We never told you what really happened." Ice flooded my veins. "What are you talking about?" She came back to the couch, sat down, took my hands in hers. They were cold, trembling. "That summer," she said, "you had a relationship with one of the senior designers at Hartwell. His name was David Hartwell, the founder's son." The name meant nothing to me. I shook my head. "You were in love with him," she continued. "You called me every week, so happy, so full of plans. He was 35, charming, brilliant. He told you he was going to leave his wife, that you'd be together, I pulled my hands away. I don't remember any of this. I know. Tears spilled down her cheeks. At the end of the summer, you found out he had no intention of leaving his wife, that there had been others before you, that he collected young interns like trophies, used them, discarded them. And you. She pressed her hand to her mouth. You confronted him. At a company event. You told him what he was, what he'd done. And Caroline, he blacklisted you. He called every firm you'd applied to for jobs after graduation. He spread rumors. He made sure that your name was poison in the industry. The room felt like it was spinning. I gripped the arm of the couch. But more than that, my mother whispered. You tried to hurt yourself. You took pills. If your roommate hadn't found you. She couldn't finish. I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be true. I would remember something like this. I would remember trying to, but there was a gap in my memory from that summer. I'd always assumed it was just the normal haziness of time. But now, sitting here, I could feel the shape of something missing, like a room in a house I'd never opened the door to. The hospital, my mother said. The therapy. It took months. And when you finally came back to yourself, when you started talking about still pursuing design, still building a career, your father and I, we were terrified. Terrified that you'd encounter David Hartwell again. Terrified that the industry he'd turned against you would destroy you a second time. I couldn't finish. So we made a plan, she said. Your father reached out to everyone he knew. He found Richard Chen, someone who owed him a favor, someone outside of Hartwell's influence. He set up the loan through Gerald. He created a path for you that bypassed every door David Hartwell had closed. You manipulated my entire career, I said, my voice hollow. We protected you, she said desperately. We gave you a chance to build something real without the man who'd tried to ruin you having any power over it. Everything you've accomplished, Caroline, the designs, the clients, the reputation, that's all you. We just made sure you had the opportunity to show the world what you were capable of. I stood up, needing to move, needing air. My mind was reeling, trying to integrate this impossible story with the narrative I'd built my life on. I'd been in love. I'd been betrayed. I'd tried to end my life. And I didn't remember any of it. The note, I said suddenly, turning to her. Who wrote the note in my bag? Her face went pale. What note? I pulled it from my purse, handed it to her. She read it, then looked up at me with genuine confusion. I don't know, she said. Your father and I never... She stopped. We never wanted you to know. We thought it was better if you believed you'd done it all yourself, that you'd healed from that summer naturally and moved on. Then who? I asked. We stared at each other, the question hanging between us like a held breath. Someone else knew. Someone else had decided it was time for me to understand. But who? And why now? After 7 years of silence. I left my mother's house 2 hours later with more questions than answers. But something inside me had shifted. The anger I'd expected to feel, at my parents, at their deception, at the architecture of my success, wasn't there. Or maybe it was buried beneath something more complicated. Grief, maybe. For the girl I'd been at 21. For the trauma I'd survived without remembering. For all the years I'd spent trying to prove something that had never actually been in question. I drove back to Manhattan slowly, the rain easing into mist, the sky opening into pale gray light. My mother had given me the name of the therapist I'd seen after the incident, a woman in Boston named Dr. Sarah Chen. No relation to Richard, just one of those strange coincidences that felt less coincidental the more I learned. I called her office from the car, using the hands-free system, not expecting anything. But she answered personally, her voice warm and familiar in a way that made my chest ache. "Caroline Ashford," she said when I introduced myself. "I've wondered about you over the years, how you were doing." "I need to see you," I said. "I know it's been a long time, but—" "I have an opening tomorrow morning," she said. 9 a.m. "Does that work?" It was almost too easy, like the universe had decided to stop hiding things from me. I drove to Boston that evening instead of going home, checked into a hotel overlooking the harbor, the same harbor where I'd had dinner with Richard Chen 7 years ago. The city felt different now, layered with histories I hadn't known existed. That night, I did something I hadn't done since building my business. I sat in my hotel room with a blank notebook and wrote, not business plans or project notes, but memories. Everything I could remember from that summer 15 years ago, even the fragments that didn't make sense. I remembered the apartment I'd shared with 2 other interns. I remembered long days at the firm, the thrill of seeing my sketches become renderings. I remembered calling my mother, feeling independent and adult and full of purpose. But when I tried to remember people, faces, names, conversations, there was nothing. Just a smooth, blank wall where something should have been. I fell asleep with the notebook open, the city lights painting the ceiling in shifting patterns. Dr. Chen's office the next morning was in a brownstone in Back Bay, all warm colors and soft furniture designed to make you feel safe enough to break open. She was in her 60s now, silver-haired and kind-eyed, and when she opened the door and saw me, she smiled like she was seeing someone she'd always hoped would return. "You look well," she said. "Strong." "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "I feel like I'm discovering I'm someone I never knew I was." We sat across from each other, and she didn't rush me, just waited, the way good therapists do, until I found the words. "My mother told me what happened that summer," I said, "about David Hartwell, about what I tried to do, and I don't remember any of it." She nodded slowly. "Dissociative amnesia. We talked about it extensively in your treatment. Your mind protected itself by walling off the trauma. Can I get it back? The memories?" "Possibly. But Caroline..." She leaned forward slightly. "You need to ask yourself if you want to. Those memories were painful enough that your psyche chose to lock them away. Retrieving them might not give you the closure you're hoping for." "Someone wants me to know," I said, and pulled out the note. "Someone left this for me. Someone thinks it's time I understood." She read it carefully, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at me with something in her eyes I couldn't quite name. "May I ask you something?" she said. "Have you spoken to your former roommate recently, from that summer?" I blinked. "I don't even remember her name." "Jessica Morris," Dr. Chen said. "She was the one who found you, who called the ambulance, who stayed with you through everything that followed." Jessica Morris. The name sparked something, a distant flicker, like light under a door. "We stayed in touch for a while after you went back to Connecticut," Dr. Chen continued. "She was concerned about you, wanted to make sure you were healing. I told her, with your parents' permission, that the best thing she could do was let you move forward without reminders of that summer. So she just disappeared from my life? You both did, from each other's." Dr. Chen handed the note back to me. "But this handwriting, it looks like a woman's, doesn't it?" My heart began to race. "Jessica stayed in Boston," Dr. Chen said carefully. "She works in the city. I can't tell you where, confidentiality, but I can tell you that she's thought about reaching out to you many times over the years, especially after your career took off, after you became successful." Why didn't she? I whispered. Maybe she thought you didn't want to remember. Or maybe... Dr. Chen's expression softened. Maybe she was waiting for the right time, when you were strong enough to handle the truth without it destroying you. I sat there, the note trembling in my hands, understanding dawning like sunrise. Jessica had left the note. Jessica, who'd saved my life 15 years ago. Who'd watched me build a career from ashes. Who'd known all along what I'd survived to get here. Where do I find her? I asked. Dr. Chen smiled, reached for a notepad, wrote down an address. She works at a gallery in the South End, she said. The Meridian Gallery. Meridian, the same name as the building project that had launched my career. That's not a coincidence, is it? I said. Very little in your story is coincidence, Dr. Chen said gently. Your parents tried to protect you. Jessica tried to remind you. And you. She looked at me with something like pride. You survived and thrived, with and without the memories. That's not nothing, Caroline. That's everything. I left her office with the address in my pocket and something close to certainty in my chest. The rain had stopped. The city was bright and clean, washed new. I drove to the South End, parked on a tree-lined street, and stood in front of the Meridian Gallery. The windows displayed abstract paintings, bold colors, fearless lines. Through the glass, I could see a woman arranging something on the far wall. Tall, dark hair pulled back, elegant in a way that suggested she'd found herself through careful, deliberate work. I pushed open the door. She turned at the sound, and our eyes met. And I knew, before she said a word, that this was the woman who'd held my hand in an ambulance 15 years ago, who'd known me when I was broken and decided I deserved to know I'd become whole. Caroline, she said softly, and her voice unlocked something in me that had been closed so long I'd forgotten it existed. A memory, not of trauma, but of friendship. Of someone who'd seen me at my worst and hadn't turned away. Jessica, I said. She smiled, and it was sad and hopeful and tinged with relief. I've been waiting for you, she said, for a very long time. We sat in the back room of her gallery, surrounded by paintings waiting to be hung, drinking coffee that had gone cold while we talked. Jessica told me everything. She told me about the night she found me in our apartment, the pill bottle empty on the floor beside my bed, my breathing shallow and my skin already going cold. She told me about riding in the ambulance, holding my hand, begging me to stay. She told me about the days after, when I'd woken up in the hospital confused and angry, insisting I wanted to go back to work at Hartwell Design, not understanding that there was no going back. You were so determined, she said, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Even in the hospital, even after everything, you kept saying you were going to be a designer, that no one could take that from you. But I don't remember any of it, I said. How is that possible? Your mind compartmentalized the trauma, she explained. Dr. Chen said it was your brain's way of protecting you. You remembered the career dream, the passion for design, but not the pain that had almost ended it. Your parents thought that was for the best, that you could rebuild without the weight of what David Hartwell had done to you. And you agreed? She looked down at her hands. I was 21 too, Caroline. I didn't know what was right. I just knew that you were alive, and that seemed like the only thing that mattered. So when your parents asked me to step back, to let you heal without reminders of that summer, I did. I went back to school. I finished my degree. I built my own life. But you kept track of me, I said. She nodded. I couldn't help it. I'd Google your name every few months, see what you were doing. When I saw you'd started your own firm, I was so proud. And then when I heard about the Meridian Tower project, she paused. I didn't know at first that your father had arranged it. I just knew you were getting the break you deserved. The break David Hartwell had tried to steal from you. When did you find out? About 3 years ago, she said. I'd moved back to Boston, opened this gallery. One night I ran into Richard Chen at a charity event. We got talking, and after a few glasses of wine, he mentioned your father. How Thomas Ashford had called in a favor, had been insistent that you get the Meridian contract. How he'd explained what had happened to you, what you'd survived. I felt my chest tighten. My father told him. He told him you were the most talented designer he'd ever seen, Jessica said softly. That you'd overcome something that would have destroyed most people. That all you needed was a chance, and you'd prove you belonged at the top of the industry. Tears burned my eyes. My father, the man who'd told me I was too soft, too emotional, had been fighting for me in ways I'd never known. Why didn't you tell me then? I asked. 3 years ago, when you found out? Jessica looked at me with something like regret. Because you seemed happy, successful. I looked at your Instagram, your company's website. You'd built this incredible life. And I thought, maybe she doesn't need to know. Maybe she's better off believing she did it all herself. But you changed your mind. I changed my mind, she agreed. Last year, I was at an event in New York, a design industry gala, and I saw you there, across the room, in this beautiful dress, surrounded by people congratulating you on some award you'd won. You looked perfect, untouchable. But I recognized the look in your eyes, she said. The same look you had that summer, before everything fell apart. Like you were proving something to yourself that could never be proven enough. Like you were running from something you didn't even know was chasing you. I closed my eyes, because she was right. I had been running. Running from my father's voice in my head, from the doubt that maybe I wasn't enough, from the fear that everything I'd built could collapse if I stopped moving long enough to really look at the foundation. I realized that the kindest thing I could do, Jessica continued, wasn't to let you keep believing the story you'd told yourself. It was to give you the truth, all of it. The trauma you'd survived, the help you'd received, the strength it took to build something real from both those things. So you left the note. She nodded. I bought that same model bag, the burgundy one. I knew you'd bought it the week you signed the Meridian contract because you'd posted about it. I wrote the note, put it inside, and waited outside your building one morning until I saw your assistant leaving for coffee. I told her I was an old friend, that I had a gift for you. She was sweet, trusting. She took it up to your apartment. But that was 7 years ago, I said. Why did it take me so long to find it? Because you weren't ready, she said simply. You had to live with your success long enough to wonder about it, to question it. The note was just waiting for the right moment, when you were strong enough to handle the answer. We sat in silence for a long moment, the truth settling between us like snow. I'm sorry I didn't remember you, I said finally. That I forgot the person who saved my life. You didn't forget, Jessica said, reaching across to take my hand. Not really. You just put me somewhere safe until you were ready to remember what I represented. Which was what? She smiled. That you were worth saving. That you were always going to be brilliant. That the trauma didn't define you. Surviving it did. I drove back to New York that afternoon with my windows down despite the cold, needing the sharp air on my face, needing to feel awake and present in my own life. When I got home, I stood in my closet again, the same closet where I'd found the note 4 days ago. But this time, I didn't see monuments to victories. I saw a life built from both strength and support, from talent and second chances, from my own determination and other people's love. I called my father, He answered on the first ring, his voice uncertain. "Caroline." "Thank you," I said. Silence. Then, "For what?" "For fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. For giving me a second chance when I didn't even know I needed one. For believing I was talented enough to deserve it." I heard him take a shaky breath. "You were always talented enough. I couldn't let what he did to you be the end of your story." "It wasn't," I said. "It was just the middle. The hard part that made the rest possible." We talked for an hour, really talked, for the first time in 15 years. He told me about the guilt he'd carried, about watching me succeed, and wondering if he'd robbed me of the satisfaction of knowing I'd done it completely alone. I told him that no one does anything completely alone, that success is always collaborative, built on chances taken and given. When I hung up, I called Marcus. "I need to tell you something," I said, "about who I was before I met you, about why I've always kept parts of myself locked away." "Okay," he said carefully. "In person," I said. "Tomorrow, if you're willing to listen." "I'm always willing to listen, Caroline. You know that." And maybe for the first time I did know that, because I was finally willing to be heard. The next morning, I met Jessica for breakfast at a cafe in the South End. She brought photos from that summer 15 years ago. Printed photos, the kind people used to take before everything became digital. There I was at 21, young and bright-eyed, and full of dreams I didn't yet know how to protect. "You can keep these," she said, "or not, whatever feels right." I looked at them for a long time, at this girl who'd become me through fire, and forgetting and finding her way back. "I'll keep them," I said. "I think it's time I remembered all of it." We made plans to see each other again, to rebuild a friendship that had existed in the margins of my memory for too long. She told me about her life, her gallery, the art she loved. I told her about my designs, my company, the life I'd built that was finally starting to feel like it belonged to me in all the ways that mattered. When I walked out of that cafe into the November sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in years, because I finally understood something I'd been too proud or too scared to accept before. My success wasn't diminished by the help I'd received. It was multiplied by it. Every person who'd believed in me, fought for me, saved me. They hadn't taken anything away. They'd given me the foundation to build something real. And what I'd built on that foundation, the designs, the reputation, the company that employed people and created beauty, that was mine. Earned through talent and work and the courage to keep going, even when I didn't remember why I'd almost stopped. After I became a millionaire, I discovered that some secrets don't stay buried. They wait in the softest leather, between silk linings, in places you've touched 1,000 times without really seeing. But the real secret, the one the note had been trying to tell me all along, was simpler than I'd imagined. That I was never as alone as I thought I was. That strength isn't about doing everything yourself. That the life I'd built was real, even if the foundation had been laid by hands I couldn't see. And that remembering, really remembering, even the painful parts, was the only way to become whole. I still have that burgundy bag. I keep it in my closet, not hidden anymore, but displayed where I can see it. A reminder that the most important messages we receive are often the ones we're not ready to read until we become the person who needs to hear them. And I've added something to it. A note of my own, written on the same cream stationery, in my own hand. Thank you for waiting, for believing, for knowing I was strong enough to handle the truth when the time was right. You were right. I was. Because after I became a millionaire, I learned that the greatest wealth isn't counted in dollars. It's counted in the people who love you enough to help you become who you were always meant to be. Even when, especially when you've forgotten who that is. If this story touched you, leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments and subscribe for the next journey.